Hello. I want to
Morning.
introduce everybody to you. This is Judy Shofner, my longtime friend, who is many things, but also a counselor and works with mental health. So when I was thinking of all the things we're dealing with in the pandemic, I know mental health is a very important part of it. So during the pandemic, what do you want us to know about mental health?
Well, I think a really important place to begin is that fear is a normal response to a threat. And I think in a lot of ways, people aren't really taught that our emotions do a job in our body. And fear, anxiety, worry are things that teach us to, to move to action. And so when we first began hearing about the pandemic, when we first began getting inklings of news, uh, we started what I experience as a counselor when I'm talking to clients about is we started a grief process because in the beginning of hearing bad news, and I know everybody that's listening has lost someone or heard bad news at some point, and you know that the very first thing that happens is just shock, stunned disbelief. And I think as we started hearing news about this pandemic and the impact and it coming across the world, I think a lot of us just found ourselves being stunned and disbelieving. And I think normalizing for everybody that's a response that makes sense. Because I think as people were like, I don't even know what to do, I can't think, that's a normal way to feel when you hear that something terrible is happening. And so everybody that's expecting themselves to feel normal in the middle of this, that is kind of trying to push away that fear, I think being able to allow that fear space and let the fear tell you what you need, it gets the body ready for action. It says, go buy the things you need, take care of your loved ones, make a plan. Unhealthy fear is when it tips over into like being unable to function, being unable to move, right? And when we talk about fear, there's the idea of fight, flight, or freeze. And if you've heard of that before, when fear happens, our body gets filled with chemistry, cortisol and adrenaline to meet the task, right? And in this case, if it were a saber-toothed tiger, we'd be ready. We're ready to fight, right? But right now, in a global pandemic, we're getting all this adrenaline and cortisol to fight an invisible enemy. And it's probably the weirdest thing ever for those of us who are not healthcare workers and first responders to be told that the best way to fight is to stay home. That's confusing for the brain. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So being able, go ahead.
Yeah, to do nothing feels like we're not accomplishing something, and when
Right.
we're used to planning, and this is like not predictable, and that's one of the hard parts about facing our grief. I like that you claim it as grief. Sometimes I forget that grief is not just about someone has died or I'm dying.
Right. Right. And what I love about talking about going through this pandemic as a grief process is I think of it as a response to most days we get up and we know what we're facing today, or we think we do, right? We think we're going to go to work. We think we're going to go to the grocery store, and we think we're probably going to have to carry the kids to soccer, right? And we have a mental image of what today is going to look like and tomorrow. So what we have is perceived certainty. None of us know the future. None of us know what happens 5 minutes from now. But if we stare at that idea, that'll just freak people out, right? Just the idea. So we live in this concept of perceived certainty. But when
So
something like this comes along.
do you feel it's kind of
Go ahead.
dissolved our illusions? The pandemic has kind of
Absolutely.
dissolved our illusions.
Absolutely. I think all of a sudden we are faced with the reality of we don't know what's next. And it dissolves that illusion of I know what tomorrow looks like and the next day looks like. And so suddenly we're in this very weird grief space of limbo. And what that is the authors of the book Getting Over Loss of a Loved One, which is a book that often gets handed out when someone passes away or when somebody goes through a terrible breakup or divorce. I think between the first edition of that book and the second edition, amongst the three authors, they experienced the death of a parent, the loss by a house fire, the loss of a job, bankruptcy, like all sorts of really difficult losses between the first edition and the second edition. And in the second edition, they recognized limbo, the loss of certainty or perceived certainty, as a real loss that triggers the grief process. So if you think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross' seminal work on death and dying, she was writing about the process people go through, the stages people go through as they are accepting their own death, their own impending death. But that model has gotten used by psychologists and counselors ever since then to talk about what we go through when a sudden change occurs in our world. And the first thing is denial. And when we all heard about the pandemic, we went, this cannot be happening. I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. And we were stunned, you know? And so when they said, I think probably the moment when everybody went, oh, wow, this is really serious. This is going to sound silly, but when they said the NBA is cutting off March Madness, that is
It
when a
became
bunch of
real.
people, yes, that is when a bunch of people went, wait a minute, something terrible is going on, right? And so it suddenly impacted their world. And that triggered this process of shock and disbelief. And the next part that people realize is bargaining. We begin to go into that. If only we did this, if only that hadn't happened. What if we start to kind of blame people and try to, our brain is trying to get us back to normal. If only this hadn't happened, if only I hadn't gone there. Well, in the pandemic sense, we begin to maybe blame our leaders, or we begin to blame ourselves for not stocking up on things, or, there's all the different ways we're going, if only this, if only that, right? And then there's sadness and anger and confusion. Those are part of that process. And so all of these need to be felt. And I think when they get described, they sound like this nice little stair step or checklist, like, okay, now I've done sadness, now I've done anger. No. A friend of mine, Dr. Margaret Beyer, colleague, she's a licensed marriage and family practitioner, and she has written about the grief process in a pinball model, so that you are feeling, you're launched into this disbelief, and suddenly you're banging up against the pinball thing that says anger, 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 sadness. You can just see that ball going across. And in a pinball model, you may be settled and fine in your home. You may be having a good morning. And I think what happens is those of us who are having to shelter in place at home get into this very settled space of watching TV or going about something. And then suddenly something reminds us, like maybe I have this tendency to pick up the phone and want to call a friend and go, hey, do you want to go have lunch? And then I realize, oh, we don't do that right now. And that moment re-triggers the whole thing. Shock. I can't believe this is happening. And so helping normalize for everyone that a moment comes over and over and over in our day where we go, inviting my friend to lunch could be deadly for me, for her grandmother, for somebody else. I think that is shocking in a way we've never lived through before in our lives, right? Short of
Yes.
World War II for some people, And there is a 100-year-old woman out there that I saw her talking about. She lived through the 1918 flu that killed so many. And she's like, I survived that and we're going to survive this. And I was like, yay, hope. and so that's what I think is helping everybody notice that anxiety in this time is normal. If you were ever going to be anxious in your life, this is kind of appropriate. I mean, it's very appropriate, not kind of, very. And then to be able to bring yourself back to the here and now, right here, right now, in this moment. Am I okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk some more about that when we talk about the coping skills to get through this, but normalizing the fear. And then I also want people to know the difference between healthy fear and, anxiety that has a shutdown and ruminating and going over. That's where we may need to assign ourselves a little worry time and start working on some coping skills and being able to give those feelings space. I think probably the second thing that I want everybody to know is we Americans have this sense of sturdy individualism. We're like stoic and we're pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, but the feelings have a job in our body. Our emotions are called feelings because we feel them, right? So people, if you're not recognizing all these feelings, you may be shoving them down. And I tell people, like, have you ever tried to shove a beach ball underwater? Like when you shove a big beach ball underwater, it comes up somewhere, right? It's not going to stay underwater. It's coming up. And if you don't manage it, and which it's almost impossible to do, it's coming up somewhere you don't want it to be. And as we shove our normal, natural emotional responses to this stress down, we end up creating a pressure within ourselves so that then we kind of snap and splatter our emotions on other people. And that often comes out as anger and irritability. And this is a time where we need to be more gentle, more kind than we've ever been before.
So maybe gentle with yourself as well as with others.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I look down at the bottom and it says, be gentle with yourself. If you are judging your responses, if you are saying, I shouldn't feel this, I shouldn't think that, that you increase that stress. So being able to allow, oh, I notice I'm feeling this. What do I need to do right now? I notice I'm thinking that. How do I handle that right now? The more we judge ourselves, the more distressful it becomes.
Yes. Well, as you were talking, I never thought that much about how those little things that help me cope, like going to lunch or having coffee with a friend, are stripped from me. And so no wonder I'm searching for another way to cope and another way to connect. So that makes me feel a little better about how I'm feeling anxious, because those coping places are just not there.
Yes, I'm finding that my extroverted clients are having a harder time, or my people whose job involves a lot of going to lunch, getting out. I have friends who are very, very social creatures. They're out meeting with others 3 or 4 times a week, 5 or 6, all the events in town. And those folks, those extroverted, out and about people, seem to be having a harder time, which, if you think about it, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Our introverts, our quiet folks, our people who, I joke that I found out when this began that my lifestyle is called quarantine. I stole that, but it's true.
Judy.
Right. Because I am very much a homebody. And so I generally do not notice the difference in the evenings when I would normally be home and having my supper. I don't notice what's going on unless I turn on the news. But during the day, working from home, I think that's another thing people have to, that I've learned about this is we've really got to make space for our experience and others. And that being those of us who work from home are actually having, like, we're so fortunate, in religious language, we might say blessed, to have the opportunity to continue our work. But that means, are we setting boundaries on that work? If our work is at home, then are we on 24/7? Now, you as a minister know that balance well, that you have to set out some time for you or your work, you know? And so for the rest who are working at home, learning to balance, what is my off time? How often will I answer the phone, or will I give myself some downtime? The other challenge then is some people are not working, and the financial stress and strain is terrifying.
Yes.
And so for those folks, what's really super important is asking for help is the strongest thing a person can do from a mental health standpoint, to me. Being able to ask for help, that strong individualism that we Americans pride ourselves by, can really get in the way when it comes to reaching out. But by reaching out, we give others the opportunity to give.
Yes.
We're always talking about giving. If we
Right.
reach out, now it's somebody else's opportunity to minister to us.
Right.
So we have to keep in mind those who aren't able to work. We have to check on each other a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and so, yeah, managing the mental, emotional, physical, social, spiritual, and financial, all those areas in this brand new experience. And
Right.
then
I'm hoping that people that need food, the first thing they would do would be to swallow their pride, because I want people that need food to find those resources. That's so important. Some that have never had to ask for food before because they've always had the income. I just hope that they will reach out.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that even the word swallow our pride is, food related. That idea that
Yeah.
there are some things that are very difficult to swallow. And yet I would bet that the majority of people who are needing to ask for the first time in their lives would be the first people giving when the food drive was put forth in the past. So helping them understand that in in times of trouble, we have to reach out to one another.
A favorite scripture that I have is Jeremiah 15:16, that says, "Your words came and I ate them. They were the joy and rejoicing of my heart." I just love
that's
that.
beautiful.
I love it. And I feel like one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, Judy, is you've done that for me through the years. And I know with your people, you give a word that they feast on, and it's the joy and rejoicing of their heart.
Thank you. The thing I do often use from the Bible is the easiest. When people struggle with emotions, and that I think I see so many people wanting to intellectualize this experience and say, I'm not sure why I'm thinking or feeling this. I'm all about the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. To me, the fact that that verse is 2 words says that it is absolutely fundamental for our mental health, that it is that the smallest child can remember a Bible verse, and that verse tells us that, the example people follow in Christ is one of emotion.
Yeah.
And it is one of feel this feeling and express this feeling. And if you're giving yourself space for your emotions right now, they're going to tell you, I am in pain. I need to reach out to a friend. I am sad and scared. I need to talk about this. Um, Being able to feel as opposed to just think it through then gives us information about how we need to react to that feeling.
Yes, not to just put it in a category or a label, but to feel what we're feeling, that we've never felt it before. We haven't been there before, no matter what we are, whether it's a helping profession or doctors, all of those are facing things they've never had. So we're learning in real time what to do.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's why I've just been, interviewing my mental health professional friends, because I think it's so important. This isn't just a physical condition. It's not just a virus that kills some people. It's also something that emotionally and spiritually is affecting us. Someone
Yeah.
said that she had read somewhere that when you are really so overwhelmed with something, one thing you can do is try to give that to someone else, because, like, let's say you're feeling very lonely,
Hmm.
calling someone who may also be feeling lonely can feed you and them. I just thought that was beautiful imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. Helping others becomes a way of lifting our mood. And so, when, I mean, one of the things that's so important right now is anytime we lose something, it highlights what matters in our life. And so, when we are in this state that is open ended, and I think, again, we have to give a lot of credence to the idea that we don't know what happens next. And we live in a world where we've never known what the future holds, but we've always thought we did. And nothing has, I think, shown us collectively, like as a nation and a world, that something can come along and just totally shake your snow globe,
That
you know?
that we are fragile, as a person and as a
Yes.
nation, we are fragile. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so being able to help others helps you. Being able to give to another gives to you. So the more we reach out, the more it feeds the idea that, oh, I do have something to offer. I am sitting here feeling this experience, and I'm not alone in this experience. I do feel that the sheltering in place is so much harder on those who are sheltering alone. And that can be even for some people, it's even a bit disorienting. Some of my clients have talked about waking up and not knowing what day it was, which is kind of normal when you're off, but not knowing for a minute where they were,
Mm-hmm.
because the senses of the brain are getting numbed without these new and different stimulations of going to lunch or going outside or going to church. So that's where brain stimulation is important, being able to incorporate different flavors. Don't eat the same thing over and over if possible. Try a different set of spices in your food if you can. Uh, have a flavored coffee instead of your regular. Do something to, and I'm food focused there, but
Well, I'd
that,
never thought of that. Variety can help you cope. I'd not thought about variety.
yeah, our brain is it's a processing center for our physical senses, and so in the normal course of most of our lives, we go about our life as a sensory individual. And right now we're in this state where we're experiencing sameness. And that, especially for people who aren't working, you're experiencing limited stimulation at the same time as you're in a pressure cooker of worry and distress. So being able to find ways to have a hot shower, play with that. If you're in the shower, go from hot to cold to hot again. Stimulate the brain. Go outside, even if you can only sit on your porch. If you think about like color, You know, we need color, we need to see color, we need to experience color. Watch something nature oriented on your TV, on your phone, on your tablet. You know, watch nature shows, be outside. The weather has been unbelievable here in Texas. I mean, whereas by this point in some years, we're already in the 90s. We've had beautiful 70s days. And so being outside can make a big difference. Socially distancing, of course.
Yes. Well,
Sensory
Judy, have you
experiences.
found anything that surprised you? You said, you know, that we live under this kind of illusion of predictability, but during the pandemic, I mean, as a healthcare counselor, you know, mental health counselor, you know about those who seek your help, but during this time, has anything surprised you about the pandemic?
I think probably one thing that's surprising is the challenge of sharing information with one another, and because everybody's in a heightened state, we seem a little more prone to get into arguments on Facebook or whatever. And so helping people recognize that reputable news sources are important. Limit your time with the news. If you can't directly impact it and it's causing a sense of helplessness, anger, and frustration, then you may need to turn that off and return your energies to your home or to helping others, right? And then I think the something that surprised me has been that people who struggle with anxiety in general, and I'm a survivor of severe panic disorder, so that's kind of why I do what I do for a living. Um, about 20 years ago, I spent about 2.5 years unable to go outside my house except to go to work because of panic disorder. Yeah, and so now what I notice is my anxiety clients and my friends who have anxiety seem to be coping better than they expected. And people who don't usually have difficulties, who are going about their lives, and again, especially my extroverted friends and clients, are just sometimes stopped in their tracks or having a harder time. So being able to recognize that sometimes what a person may see as a weakness, their anxiety experience, may become their strength at a time where anxiety is more the norm. One of the people I talked to said it feels like my mental experience of anxiety is now out in the world and other people are experiencing it with me.
That's a new way of looking at we're all in this together. I've
Yeah,
had anxiety, now you do too. Now you know what I feel.
yeah. And
I can see that.
I gotta admit, for me, I feel so normal now because I tended to rev up here. It's a challenge, you know, the way my brain's wired. And one of the things I try to get across to people is fight or flight is a useful tool if you are under a sudden threat. You know, the body gives us adrenaline if somebody shouts in a grocery store, and our brain goes, what is that? And it gets ready. Do I need to run? Like our brain is assessing the situation. Do I need to run? Do I need to fight? Right? And so those are great coping skills in a true threat, in immediate threat. But there are so few times in our lives where punching something or running is really an appropriate response to stressors, right? Because we're in a staff meeting and somebody says something that sets us off. It's not appropriate to punch somebody or to get up and run. Does that make sense? So now we're presented with a global life-threatening illness that can be in a person's body and spreading for 2 weeks before they are symptomatic. And suddenly tribalism is kicking in. And tribalism is that idea of under threat, humans and animals close the circle and guard their own. And so in that regard, you see people at heightened levels of intensity when we're arguing about getting enough toilet paper, or heightened levels of intensity in food lines, heightened levels of anger and intensity discussing politics. You know,
Whether
that's
to
what,
reopen or to
right,
stay
right.
in.
Economic stimulation versus safety. And so when I hear like the information I've been reading about, um, a person who is an expert in epidemiology and pandemics, and she said that we may be looking at like a 3-year rotation. If we don't come up with a vaccine next year, we may be looking at a rotation situation where there will be hot spots that flare up of the illness, and that area will need to slow itself down for a couple of weeks, as opposed to the whole world being shut down for 8 months. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so with that, then I think what a lot of people are experiencing is their brains can't seem to wrap around the idea that this is not going to come and go in a finite space of time, that we may be dealing with this over time. And that can be really overwhelming. So that's another part of, of not.
Yeah, to have endurance. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Very much.
Yes.
And in that
Yes.
regard, it may even be a relay marathon. So I
Mhm.
hold you when you can't hold up, you hold the next person. You know, I run for them, you run for them, they run for the another. You know, we all take care of and we take care of our caretakers, you know, our nurses, our doctors. And we also are learning. And this is, I think, another thing that I, from a mental health perspective, didn't see. There are a lot of people like our teachers and our grocery workers who felt overlooked by our society, and they're now experiencing a resurgence of pride in what they do and what they contribute to society.
Yes.
And so it's another time where we're figuring out what's important,
Well, I
what
like the
matters.
imagery of relay. Not only you take care of me and I help with you and we help each other along the way, but also to it's all one person, whether they're dealing with something spiritually, emotionally, physically, it's the same person. So we all, as clergy, as mental health, as doctors,
Yeah.
physicians, all of us are helping the same issue and the same person, whether it's psychological or sociological. So I appreciate the
Right.
relay imagery.
Yeah, and I give that relay imagery even to our lay people, in that on the days that they're strong, that's their day to lift somebody else up. On the
Yeah,
day that they are, you know, have 5 people that you know that are living by themselves, make sure you're calling them. This is
yes.
hard for those who are staying alone, who haven't done that before.
Yes, well, Judy, I have so appreciated this. This has been helpful to me, and I hope it will be for other people. Any just last word as we close?
Um, I would say make sure that you're using healthy coping skills. Unhealthy coping skills are where we're, you know, turning to too much food, too much. I joked earlier that I was afraid that COVID-19 would be the name of this illness from the year it was discovered, but also the number of pounds I've gained while we were here, uh, sheltering at home. But that just reminds me that I'm lucky, you know, or fortunate or blessed to have the food that I have.
Mm,
So I'd say just some quick tips as we go. For those who need it, develop a routine. um, Set aside time for your Bible study, your yoga and meditation practice. Um, Continue doing the normal things that you can do. And in those things, develop a mindfulness practice where every time you notice your mind wandering off to the distress of what if this, what if that, so, you know, say to yourself, I notice that worrying fear. I notice that fear. I'm going to return to the thing I'm doing with the fullness of my senses. I'm thinking of gardening. If you're working on a mint plant, then smell that plant and be fully present and help your body settle down right here, right now, in this moment. I'm okay. I'm going to let this tension go. people of faith. I'm going to let God handle this moment with me. I'm going to envision his love and care around the world. If I have existential questions about the why of this, I'm going to think about my personal philosophies, and I'm going to talk with my clergy if I'm struggling with that. Address your sleep. Sleep, well. People are starting to report pandemic dreams, dreams about being told they have the illness, dreams about being in the hospital and being treated. This is kind of a phenomenon that's coming up. I've had at least one, but I had heard about it before then. So if you're not sleeping well, phone your doctor. Don't rely too much on over-the-counter medications. Try to exercise within your home. Keep your body moving to some degree. Motion is the lotion that keeps us all working. And be validating to one another. When somebody else is sharing their fear, this is not a time to say, don't feel that way. I kind of don't like that phrase about anything, but say, I hear you, you sound sad. I hear you, you're pretty frustrated today. Give space for feelings. Connect with others, really, really important. And probably one of the things that, I would say most is limit your news, limit especially those that are inflammatory and fear mongering. We need to just be as deep, appropriate as possible in, here are some details. How do I bring myself back into my regular day? And then don't forget laughter. Don't forget
Yes.
laughter. Find a way to
Yes.
laugh, use humor, enjoy each other. Um, Writing is really important. Music, and then probably I would say know the difference between normal distress and serious mental health issues. If a person starts to not do the things, if you're having difficulty getting out of bed days in a row, if you're not attending to personal hygiene, if everything feels listless and useless, if you begin to feel hopeless or helpless, there are so many hotline numbers out there. There's a national suicide hotline, but you don't have to be suicidal to call for help. Texas has come up with a I just need to talk to somebody hotline for people who are living home alone. You can look those up easily. Young people are into texting. Text 741-741 if you just need to talk. That's a national text line. And then the CDC has a web page with a file on things to do. So there are
Thank
many
you.
resources.
Judy, I appreciate all of those resources, and it even makes me think about what the church can do in developed texting and all kinds of ways for people to call in if they can't be in person. But I love the resources and just to affirm what we need to do to reach out, however we're facing it. Thank you for being a part of this and for being my friend and for your commitment to mental health.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonette. I love you. I appreciate it. Take care.
Blessings.